drop float wrist. So I want to talk to you a little bit about how to use your wrist, particularly what I call the drop float wrist. It's used a lot in the classical period, and you were introduced to it back in Habits Level 1 when you learned 16th century march. So if you want a lot of good practice and great explanation right from the beginning, go back and learn 16th century march. But you can also kind of understand it and apply it to any level piece if you know what to look for. So I'm going to use as an example the Samuel Arnold Sonata in D major from the repertoire grade 8. So it starts out with this two-note slur, so from A to D. So how we want to feel in our wrist is on that first note, we're going to drop into the key. That makes a little bit of a louder sound. And then on the last note of a slur, we're always going to lift up and float away. So it's drop, float. So it will sound loud, soft. Now by making these motions in the wrist, it makes the weight of our arm change when we're playing the key and gives a lot of musical shape and color to what you're playing. If you just do it with your finger, it can sound kind of mechanical, kind of like a robot. So by giving it that little bit of change in weight, you make a much more beautiful sound and add a lot of variety to your playing. So just playing, going on to measure 9 in this sonata, it has this big run that's all full of two-note slurs. So for example, so what I'm doing is just drop floating on each one of those two-note slurs. So drop, float, drop, float. And really my emphasis of my feeling is on my drop. So I'm just dropping and then really relaxing and lifting my arm just out of the key. And then it's easy, if you keep really loose, you can do it fast. So when the piece actually goes, instead of it being, it's very classical to end all those slurs very, very softly. It's much easier to do when you're really good at that float wrist. You use the drop float also in phrases that aren't necessarily even slurred or slurs that are longer than two notes, maybe 3 to 4 notes. So for an example, let's look at the Sonata in G major by Beethoven, also found in grade 8. And even in this first motive, we have, and there's no slur there, but to have the appropriate classical shape, you're going to feel that same drop float. So I'm feeling drop into the key, float away. So I'm hearing this loud to soft. And as my wrist makes a circle, the weight of my arm changes, and it creates that variety of sound or a shape. So instead of just being my fingers, which sounds kind of mechanical and unmusical, if you have the drop float, it sounds really musical and beautiful with a lot of shape. This also comes along a lot in this piece. Again, it's not necessarily even a slur, but just the motive has that drop float. It's very classical. So starting in measure 15, you see the right hand go. So again, you'd use that drop float through all of it because it's a short group of notes. Now if you don't do that, and you'll end up playing that thumb really loud, it will sound like. So it gets a little clanky after a while. So if you really feel the drop float and have that last note be soft, so make sure you're taking the weight away, not pushing in on the note. So, and like I said, that drop float is found mostly in classical music. So just look for it and always know that as you're playing, you don't ever want notes to sound exactly the same dynamic. And as you use that wrist, it will change the weight of your arm just enough so that your attack to the key is different and your sound will always be changing, and it will give you such a variety of color and sound in your playing.